So now what we'll do is some of the Science and Public Policy members is going to take a quick moment to introduce themselves and tell us how they entered into the field of psychology. So I'll hand you over to Nuala Whelan there first.
Great, thanks, Shane. Hi everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're all here this evening. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my own route into psychology, and a bit about what I do now. Just a few minutes. So I suppose when I was in school, I was good, I think, at English and music. They were my top two subjects, and when I came to the Leaving Cert, I kind of had no idea what I wanted to do. So I figured, well, I'll just kind of keep going on what I've been good at so far. And I went to UCD to do arts. So I had to take a third subject. And after a lot of faffing around with different subjects, history and geography and so on, I decided to go with psychology, just purely because it seemed very interesting. I didn't really know a lot about it, and I thought it would be a nice third subject to have. So after my first year, I absolutely loved it. And no offense to any English or music teachers on the call, but I decided that that wasn't the route for me and decided to keep going with psychology. And at the time in UCD, the way that psychology was organized, you had to try and get into the top 70 people after your first year, so be in the best top 70. So unfortunately, I didn't make it in after first year, but I had to repeat the year and finally got in on my second attempt. So continued in psychology, but was very interested in kind of social psychology and how organizations worked, families, family groups, teams at work, and so on. So I decided to go down the route of occupational psychology. So how people are in work, how work is organized, kind of the whole concept of working and what that means for us. And I went on and did a master's in the UK, in the University of Hull, on industrial psychology, which sounds very dated now, I have to say, but it's what we now call work and organizational psychology. And I was really kind of interested in people in work, but also people who are out of work. So how people make decisions about their careers, how they end up in the jobs that they end up in. So I wanted to work, I knew I wanted to work after that in the kind of community sector or in a non-profit making type of capacity. And I was very interested in people maybe who had less opportunities or less options available to them in their lives. So I then went to work in a community-based employment service, and I worked there for 20 years, working with people who had experienced a variety of challenges to the labour market and difficulties that they faced in their lives in terms of maybe getting onto the career ladder and building up a good career for themselves. So we developed a lot of tools and methods and approaches, carried out a lot of research, worked obviously with clients over those years. And I decided then to go back to education in 2013 to do a PhD in looking at well-being and employment and employability and so on. So I'm now working at Maynooth University as a lecturer in adult guidance and reflective practice, which I suppose I'm now working with a lot of guidance counsellors and people who, again, want to kind of either come back to education or look at alternatives to what they've experienced so far. So that's kind of my, jaggedy route through psychology to working as a psychologist now, both in academia and in practice. So I'll hand over to Suzanne, who's going to tell us a bit about her journey next.
Thanks, Nuala. Hi, everybody. It's great to see an interest in the event. So I'm currently a professor of psychology at the UCD School of Psychology. When I was in secondary school, I came across a novel, a very trashy novel, where the central character was a clinical psychologist working in a children's hospital. And I'd always been involved in sort of youth and community projects within Tala, where I'm from, and worked a lot with children and families, and this job just sounded fantastic. So 2 years of pestering brother Kevin, who was my guidance counsellor at the time, about how do I study psychology, And like Nuala, when I came to UCD, I came to study arts, and we were the first cohort that had that 70 criteria, 70 places at the end of first year to get into what was then called honours psychology. So I scraped through into those 70, not covering myself in glory, but having realised that I really liked the subject. I definitely still wanted to be a clinical psychologist, or thought I did. And it was only after I finished my degree and started a master's with an aim to go on and train as a clinical psychologist that I was exposed to the wonderful world of research in psychology, and very quickly fell in love with the academic world, with teaching and research, and all that goes with it. So I've actually been in UCD since I started as a first year student. If you cut me open, I think the UCD colours are in the inside. But it's been a fantastic journey through master's, PhD, working as a very junior lecturer, to the point where I'm now head of school. So delighted to talk about the different ways in which people can get into the study of psychology, because I think it's really been a very defining feature of who I am and what I do now, that I probably didn't think it would be when I first picked up that novel and read about that clinical psychologist. So back to Shane for his introduction.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. Yeah, I had a great interest in psychology really throughout secondary school, mostly because I had no interest in any other subject in secondary school as such. I kind of had a misunderstanding that psychology was high points, or that if I wanted to study a course with low points in psychology, I'd have to move far away. So I opted for the arts route, kind of similar to Nuala and Suzanne, hoping to get into psychology in my second year. Unfortunately, on one dull evening in UCC, I was advised by the psychology department that is not an option in UCC. So luckily enough, I became aware of the Masters of Arts conversion, which they have a number of them around the country, I then realized, which we have accredited on the PSI website. So I actually just needed 60 credits in psychology, which I had achieved in my arts degree, to then go into psychology. From there, I went and worked in a bit of social care for a while, but my main interest really was in research, which my master's was really heavy in. So now I work in the Psychological Society of Ireland as a research and policy officer. So what I'll do now is I'll probably tell you just a bit more about the Psychological Society of Ireland, just who we are and what we do. So if my slides work for me. Yeah, so we're a knowledge-led psychological membership body, meaning that all of our members are volunteers, and all the driving work in the Psychological Society of Ireland is done by our members and volunteers and a small team of staff. Our mission is to support a community of psychological professionals and future professors to develop and improve their competence and to enhance their ability to translate psychological science into meaningful practice. More specifically, the Science and Public Policy Committee, it was set up to promote scientific and evidence-based psychological knowledge to inform public policy and inform the public for the better. So now that we've kind of done an introduction on who we are, we just want to find out a bit about who our audience is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to launch a quick poll just to see what everyone does, whether you're a student or a guidance counselor or anything along those lines. So just bearing with me. Okay, so you should see that on your screens right about now. Just give it a minute or so. So a lot of secondary school students and mature students. So there's a good few guidance counselors and some parents here as well. That's great. So that's it. That's fully answered. Okay, great. I'm going to end the poll there. Actually, see the results there. So we're just going to move on. So more of what the Psychological Society of Ireland does is we try and set the standards for psychology in Ireland. So one of the ways we do that is by our members. Our members swear to abide by our code of ethics when they first join us. Another way is through the accreditation of psychology courses, both postgraduate and undergraduate in Ireland. So accreditation is a process undertaken by the PSI to ensure that Irish psychology courses are suitable for students hoping to enter into the field of psychology or into a career in psychology. So to talk about some careers in the field of psychology, I'm just going to pass you on to Nuala Whelan there again.
Great, thanks, Shane. So yeah, great, really interesting to see the breakdown of who's on the call. So hopefully I can adjust what I'm saying to make sure that it's meeting everybody's needs. The chat, I think, is still available to put your questions in. Is that right, Shane? So please do ask us any questions if we're not giving you the information, or if you have any questions about what we're presenting. So really, I'm going to talk a bit about what psychology is, the types of careers that people go on to using their psychology degree, either as a psychologist or in other areas, and what I think it means to be a good psychologist, and the types of transferable skills that maybe you develop as well, which are quite important in the world of work more generally. So I suppose the textbook definition of psychology is really what's written there on the screen, that it's the scientific study of the human mind and behavior. So psychologists use science to try and understand the human mind and behavior, and they use this knowledge to help people to improve the quality of their lives, really. Most psychologists that I know, that's their aim, is that, you know, that life, that we get more, you know, our well-being improves, we have a better quality of life, we have maybe more opportunities to do things that we'd like to do in our lives. So helping people maybe to make change in their lives, or developing programs or interventions so that people can improve their well-being, or researching and trying to understand everyday lives. So trying to use these scientific principles to understand that. So you can see there in the little visual that we try to describe behavior, explain behavior, predict behavior, and change behavior. So all of those are the kind of facets of the work that a psychologist in any discipline really, or any area of psychology, will try to do in their work. And it's a multifaceted discipline, in that psychology is really maybe the umbrella term, with lots of sub-fields within that. So human development, cognitive processes, social behavior, lots of different ideas around, you know, what psychology, or different ways of using psychology in the world. And it's a fairly new science, really. It's only been in existence for about the last 150 years, although you can trace it back to Greek and Roman times. But as a discipline itself, really since the late 1800s, where kind of medicine and philosophy kind of tried to come together to see the relationship between the physical and the mental, or the psychological. So bringing those to bear on how we understand behavior. And you can see there on that slide that there are many different areas of psychology, as I've said, and many different types of psychologists. So the one that maybe most of you are familiar with might be in the little green there, the clinical psychology. So clinical psychologists generally work in healthcare settings, often as part of a multidisciplinary team. And their job is to try and treat and provide clinical care to people who maybe experience quite significant psychological challenges or mental ill health. And many psychologists that work in the kind of clinical settings often specialize in a particular area of the lifespan. So maybe in childhood mental health, adolescent mental health, adults, and so on. So that's probably the area of psychology that most people are familiar with. And Suzanne mentioned her clinical psychologist in the book that she read. So they're often featured on TV programs, and we know a lot about clinical psychology, maybe from TV and movies. Other types of psychologists, though, educational psychologists, and anyone who's in a school setting may be familiar with educational psychology. So they try to look at learning, our processes of around learning, how we retain information, maybe people who experience learning difficulties or have different learning styles, and the types of supports that they might need to be able to learn information, maybe in a mainstream setting. So often you find educational psychologists working in the education sector. They'd often offer also kind of counselling support around education and learning, or issues that arise in a school setting. Then academia and research and teaching really are, I suppose, what Suzanne and myself are doing at the moment, in that looking at raising more questions, I suppose, about behaviour and trying to research and understand behaviour, build theory, test theory, but also to bring back, you know, the kind of contemporary and cutting edge research into universities, so that students have access to that kind of information and knowledge to inform their own learning. Then occupational is the area that I went into, so very interested in people in work, very similar to, I suppose, a HR role, or you find many occupational psychologists working in HR or learning and development departments in business, looking at maybe recruitment and selection methods, motivation, leadership, culture of organizations, people's well-being and work. And then counselling, very similar to clinical psychology, but often maybe working more in the kind of outpatient world than in real healthcare settings. And they often deal with more everyday psychological challenges, and put together treatment plans and work on a longer term basis with clients. Neuropsychology then is really the kind of connection between the physical brain and our behaviour. So often working in settings, we're developing treatment plans for people maybe who've experienced a traumatic brain injury or something like that, where they can support people in their treatment and rehabilitation. Sports psychology, very popular also. So for anyone who's interested in sports, a way of maybe combining that with your psychology. And sports psychologists tend to look at people enhancing their performance, elite sports people, teams, understanding maybe sports people's mental health in relation to maybe the pressure that they experience in big tournaments and so on. So trying to really enhance performance and helping people in the sports sector maybe overcome difficulties that they may have in their work related to maybe injury or their own experiences and challenges in that kind of competitive environment. And then forensic psychology is really the connection between, I suppose, law and psychology. So forensic psychologists often work with people who maybe have a criminal record, or often victims of crime as well. They maybe assess the risk of somebody reoffending and the mental health of prisoners as well. So a whole range of kind of different areas where people apply their psychology. If you just want to click again there, Shane, yeah, you can just see, brilliant. But more recently, I suppose, we've seen environmental psychology. So there's a master's in environmental psychology this year, starting in Maynooth, but also community and social psychology, coaching psychology, psychological well-being practitioners. So we see all of these new terminologies or labels for different roles often appearing. Even recently, I saw an aviation psychologist. So I thought that was quite interesting for anyone who's maybe considering psychology or being a pilot. Those kinds of, you know, connecting, so working with people in different types of jobs and helping them have better well-being, I guess, in their job. Okay, Shane, if you want to move on there. So what do you need to be a good psychologist? Well, I tried to think about this and the psychologists that I know and the types of settings that they work in. So I think really you just need to genuinely be interested in helping people at the end of the day, whether you're working in a research capacity or as a practitioner, that ultimately what you're doing is to help improve people's lives. I think you need to have empathy so that you're able to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're working with and try to understand how they're experiencing their lives and the world around them. Be a good listener, so kind of no assumptions or prejudgments, and try to be as objective when you're working in either research or as a practitioner. Good observational skills to pick up on, you know, the ambience of the situation or things that are going on that maybe aren't communicated through just language, but being able to kind of understand the situation and read it well. Have patience, because often the work that we do can take a lot of time. Excellent interpersonal skills. Be a good problem solver, so to be able to piece together you know, parts of the puzzle and try to come to solutions, particularly if you're working with a client, that with your client you're coming to those solutions. And be trustworthy, that people need to trust you in the work that you do, and that you're working in an evidence-based way and can support them with that. Okay, Shane. Great. But also just to be aware that it can be very demanding, that often in many of the roles that I just mentioned, you can be working with clients who have severe problems and challenges, and that your job as the psychologist is to remain enthusiastic and hopeful about the work that you're doing, that you're able to bounce back and be resilient in your work, that you can still maintain a calm, professional approach, and of course, an ethical approach in terms of client confidentiality and how you work with your clients. Okay, Shane. And if you could just click again, that'd be great. Thank you. So I've mentioned a lot of the kind of career areas that if you decide after your undergraduate studies to become a psychologist, that many people move into those areas. But also, we know that about 80% of people who have an undergraduate degree in psychology move into other areas of work. So you can see there from this slide that some of the graduate outcome survey data for the UK shows that a lot of the participants in the study moved into other areas, not just progressing into further education in psychology. So, and Shane, if you can go on again, that would be great. So what types of jobs do psychologists or people studying psychology move into if it's not psychology? And if you could click again, Shane, sorry, thank you. So lots of areas of work, including any kind of social, health or community type of work, public services, business, HR, IT companies, the whole range of career areas. And really, I was at an event last week in the Docklands in Dublin, where employers were talking about what they're really looking for in graduates coming into business. And this was in a range of different sectors, but mainly actually in kind of digital and IT related sector, that really they were looking for transferable skills. And that while they wanted people to have a degree, in many cases, not always, they felt that really the transferable skills were the essential components that they were looking for. And that the degree or the type of degree that the person had didn't really matter particularly, that they will train you or they will put you on their graduate program and so on. So the types of transferable skills that I think that if you have a degree in psychology that you develop are things like critical reasoning and analytical skills. So understanding a lot of the literature that you read, conducting research and designing research studies really helps you to be able to analyze within an evidence-based discipline. So this is a really important skill, being able to pull together lots of different types of data and analyze that data. To be able to effectively communicate, so develop arguments that are supported by evidence, while also being sensitive to the needs and expectations of others. So drawing on all of the literature and researching maybe the topic that you're discussing in work and being able to communicate that effectively. being aware of the factors that shape behavior and social interactions, and appreciating that people come from often very complex social situations. That's really, really important for building relationships, for negotiating, for networking in a work setting. Planning and project management skills, again, through undertaking research and also team projects as part of your degree. Being able to be an effective team worker, and this is the thing that came up last week continuously: teamwork, teamwork, teamwork. Being able to listen to your team and solve problems and work together. Reflection, self-reflection, to be able to reflect on yourself: what went well, what needs improvement, how did I react, could I change how I reacted, could I do something differently next time? So being able to take that space at the end of the day to reflect on yourself and your work. And then ethical awareness. And I've seen a lot recently of jobs advertised that are focused on equality, diversity and inclusion, looking for people who have a background in psychology or social sciences. So again, a big area of work that many big companies have equality, diversity and inclusion policies and units established. So again, to be able to be ethically aware of practice. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, resilience. So lots more transferable skills that I'm sure that Suzanne and Shane and Rona will tell us about later. But I hope that was helpful. And I'm going to hand over now to Suzanne, who's going to talk a bit more about the routes into psychology.
Thanks, Nuala. So I suppose recognizing that there's a lot that you can do with a degree in psychology, both in terms of professional training and other areas, what we wanted to focus on was addressing some of the possible gaps in people's knowledge about what those routes are. So it's important to be, I suppose, to be very comfortable with the idea that someone who is a professional psychologist has typically completed specialist postgraduate training in their area. So Nuala talked about her training in occupational psychology. I completed a master's and a PhD in research. That's my area. So if someone is a professional psychologist, they have this specialist postgraduate training, which is either at level 9 or level 10. Increasingly, programs like clinical and counselling and education are at doctoral level. But in order to access those programs, and importantly, to compete to access those programs, it is essential that you have an honours undergraduate degree in psychology. And obviously from PSI's perspective, an accredited degree means you have completed a degree that has been shown to meet those standards set by a professional body. And psychology societies around the world accredit programs in their own countries. That undergraduate degree might be a single or a joint honours, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Or it could be an equivalent conversion programme, such as the one that Shane talked about. And increasingly, psychology programmes that recognise the existing skills that people with degrees in a variety of areas have and bring to the study of psychology are becoming available either as 2-year higher diploma programs or as 1-year master's programs. And I'll talk a little bit about those. But the undergraduate degree, the level 8 degree or the conversion are considered to be a first qualification in psychology and form the basis for going on to apply for postgraduate. Now, I think the big question then is, what are the routes into a level 8 degree in psychology? And before we talk a little bit about some of that information, what we're going to do is just do a little poll to get a sense of what, I suppose, your understanding is of some of those routes. So Shane, I'll just hand over to you to activate that poll, please.
Perfect. Well, that should be coming up on your screen now. Give it 30 seconds or so.
So what do you think are some of the issues in accessing undergraduate psychology, and where do those points, what's the points or the points that we're familiar with reflect about studying psychology? Okay, so good recognition that the points are driven by interest, very marketplace principles. Some views that it's a reflection of how hard the content is, and then nearly 30% feeling that I have to get over 500 points to be a psychologist. So I'd say we'll give that a moment more, Shane.
Yeah.
In clear recognition that there's a driver of the marketplace, that because lots of people want to do psychology, that has the impact of increasing the points. And do be sure, if you've any questions while I am talking, please feel free to post them into the chat. So I'm going to talk about two different aspects. Oh, as you can see, so there's our final answer: 62% recognizing the influence of interest, 25% feeling that the points reflect how hard the content is, and 30% recognizing, reporting that you have to get over 500 points. And actually, what I hope you're going to get from my part of the presentation is that the first point is completely true, and the second and third points are not true at all. So thank you for your responses to that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the typical routes into an undergraduate program. So this is really the CAO, and I suppose we're very aware of the CAO process within Ireland. For those of you who are secondary school students, your guidance counsellors and teachers are talking about it. For those of you who are working in secondary education, you're aware of deadlines and the research that students do to find out what are their options. So again, it's really important that if you want that baseline for psychology training, that you do an honours psychology program. And that, as I said, can be a single honours program or a joint program. And it's really important that you look at the programs that are out there. So I just did a quick check, and the website qualifax.ie lists 25 different courses with psychology in the title, and Careers Portal list 30 courses. And there's courses out right across the country that are level 8 courses in psychology, either as single or joint honours. Now, from PSI's perspective, if you go to the PSI website and look at the accredited programs, there are actually 34 named undergraduate programs, and I'll come on to why there's 34 there in a moment. But these are across 14 institutions, and I've listed the institutions there on the right-hand side as you're looking at it, listed alphabetically, no other order implied. But these are the organisations that currently have an accredited level 8 honours programme or equivalent, a conversion course. For the ones that are applied for through CAO, actually all of those level 8 honours programs are 3 or 4 years duration. And I often get asked, what's the difference between a 3 or 4 year degree? And in fact, there's very little substantive difference in terms of the content. And because these are all accredited by PSI, you know that it's been confirmed that they offer the breadth of psychology that's needed for a foundational qualification. So whether it's 3 or 4 years, it might be that some programs have placements, some programs have years abroad. There can be a variety of factors. And then coming back to that belief that you have to get over 500 points to be a psychologist, well, I would break that immediately. I didn't get 500 points in my leaving cert, nowhere near. And I think there's a lot of my colleagues who would say the same. But even looking at the 2022 data for the programs that are accredited by PSI, the round 1 points ranged from 251 to 601. And 12 of the 20 programs had points above 500. And the average points actually was 487. But as you can see, there is a range of points there. And obviously those points do reflect that popularity. The more people apply for a course, the higher the points will be. And I think for all of the programs bar 2, the points dropped at round 2 as well. But what happened with the drop at round 2 was typically it then reverted to random selection. So that can be very frustrating. But if you look down the list of institutions there that have an accredited honours degree program or equivalent in psychology, just ask yourself, which are the ones that you're surprised to see there? I mean, obviously, Shane went to UCC, Nuala is working in Maynooth at the moment, I'm in UCD, but look at the other institutions that are there that have an accredited program. And obviously, schools of psychology, departments of psychology, universities, colleges will differ in how they deliver their teaching. They'll differ in how they support their students. They'll differ in how research active their staff are. They'll differ in many things, but all of these organizations have an accredited undergraduate program or equivalent. And that is the benchmark. That's what you want to complete. And then just to highlight the variety in those programs, Shane, if you can just click on to the next slide there. This is just a direct copy of the list of programs that are there. So you can see it's a combination of BA and BSc honours programs. So these are all single honours programs. And I'm often asked, what's the difference between a BA and a BSc? There's actually almost no difference other than the letters. A BA is typically embedded within a broadly arts or humanities faculty or setting, whereas a BSc may be in a science or a social science setting. So the difference is more the home where the school is rather than the content. And what you'll also see is that there's slight differences in language. So you've got the BA in applied psychology, that's UCC. You've got the BA honours in psychology and sociology, so that's a joint honours programme. And then one of the most, in fact, last year, the single most popular programme in the country in psychology for accredited programs was the BEd in education and psychology in Mary Immaculate. It had the highest points at 601. So lots of variation here in what these degrees are called. And then you'll see, because I've ordered it alphabetically, you've got those conversion courses coming in at the end, the higher diploma and the master's. So these are across 14 institutions, the courses that are currently accredited. And you can go onto the PSI website at any time and see the current list. But it's really important to think about some of the assumptions that people might make. You know, someone might say, well, you can only be a psychologist if you've done a single honours psychology degree. That's not true. The programme in psychology and sociology is accredited, and in many, the program in education and psychology is the most popular program in terms of points as a measure, but it does only take a small number of students. And then you'll have obviously programs that are in arts and in science. There's different places through which you can study, but all of these would be recognized in exactly the same way when you're ticking the box. Have you completed an accredited honours degree in psychology or equivalent? And that's the language you'll see. So that's the route that we're most familiar with. But one of the things that we wanted to raise awareness about were the other routes to undergraduate programs in psychology. And I've actually mentioned 6 different routes here on this slide. And I'm just going to take a minute to highlight each of them. And some of them you'll be familiar with and others you may not be. So mature students, there are dedicated and designated places for mature students in most of the main undergraduate programs in psychology in Ireland. And many of you will be familiar with this route. You must be 23 years old or older on the 1st of January on the year in which you're applying for admission. So if you're 23 or older now, you would be eligible to apply for admission in autumn of this year. And again, programs across the country have dedicated mature student places. It's important to look at the variation. Some places will require aptitude tests, others will waive those if you've completed access programs, which I'll come into. But this is has always been a very popular route for students in psychology. In a moment, one of our graduate from psychology who came through this route will share her experiences. A much more recent development has been the QQI or FET route. So as I've highlighted there, this is for students who have level 5 or 6 QQI or further education qualifications, and they can be admitted to these undergraduate programs on a competitive basis and based on meeting minimum requirements. So in UCD, I think we have 10 places are allocated to QQI, and Maynooth also has dedicated QQI entry, and a number of other institutions are developing this. And I know in UCD, it's a requirement of 5 distinctions in your qualification. Again, it is competitive. And you do, I know in UCD, and I'm sure in Maynooth, that there is random selection of the people who meet that minimum requirement. But this is a route that's growing, and it's one that people are not very familiar with. And as someone who teaches first year psychology, I think the students who come in from the QQI route, because they typically have either very directly relevant psychology modules or very relevant associated areas, they're really primed and ready for the study of psychology. And the third one I've mentioned there is access programs. It looks like somebody's gotten hold of the marker pen on my slides. I don't know if others can see that. But the access or foundation programs, these are, I suppose, pre-registration programs that are available for, as it says, they're adults who may not have the formal qualifications that would allow them to enter into university or higher education. So there are two types of access or foundation programs. There are those that are standalone qualifications in themselves, and the Trinity Access program is internationally renowned as an access route into higher ed. So there are those that are standalone qualifications, but all those that also those that have direct routes to specific degree programs. So here in UCD, in September of this year, we will be welcoming our first students who've come through those degree programs. And I know Rona will say a little bit about her experience with those pathways. I'm not going to say too much about the HERE and DARE programs, the Higher Education Access Route and the Disability Access Route to Education. But again, it's really important that students recognise, and guidance counsellors and parents, that for young people and students who are coming to third level with a disability, having experienced challenges in their engagement with education, that there are most, if not all, of the programs that I mentioned on the previous slide, particularly in the main universities, will have dedicated places. And in fact, I know in UCD, it's not unusual that we don't fill those places, and then those places will instead be offered to students on the other routes. And then the last one that I wanted to mention, because it's one I get asked a lot about in open days, is the potential to transfer from one program to another. And for when we have open days here in UCD, and I know it comes up in other places, students who feel a connection to a particular institution, are concerned that they won't or don't have the points to get into that institution, will often ask, well, if I take up a place in another setting, can I then apply to transfer to Trinity or UCD? And again, all of the main universities have an external transfer process. But one of the things I really stress to students is you really, really shouldn't rely on it. For two reasons. One, the places it's often only very small numbers of places, not even a handful of places available for transfers. And one of the things that you have to show is that you have sufficient credits in the course you're doing that are relevant to the course you want to transfer into. And what I sometimes find is that the courses that students have done, they haven't done enough psychology to transfer into second year of psychology here in UCD, and that happens elsewhere. The other thing I'd say about transfers is I would often have students who are in accredited programs asking about transferring into UCD. And the first thing I say to them is, you're in an accredited program, your degree is recognised by the Psychological Society of Ireland. You would be much better served really committing to your studies on that accredited program and getting the best degree that you can, so that you can then apply and be competitive for postgraduate training. And one of those myths that we regularly hear about is the idea that you can't get into professional training if you've got a degree from an institution that's seen as being not as sparkly and shiny as the main universities, or you won't get into a postgraduate degree in psychology if you've done the Open University program. That's not true. We have students on our postgraduate training programs from many of the institutions that were on the previous slide, including institutions in the UK as well, which I haven't gone into. So if you are in an accredited program, your best bet is to actually work to achieve the best degree that you can in that program. And it may be that you don't enjoy the modules that are offered. It may be that you want a different type of supports from your institution, but the option to transfer into another setting is going to be very limited. So I think, Shane, that's the last of my slides. If you can just click on. Oh, actually, no, it's not. I just wanted to highlight that the Qualifax and Careers Portal websites have a huge amount of information on them about these programs. So this is the Qualifax entry from Maynooth University, and what you can see is it's got information on the points, the number of places, what level degree it is, how long it is, what subjects you need, all of that. It's also got information on QQI entry, on places for students coming from the LCVP, if that's relevant. The next slide is from careerportal.ie, which provides additional information on programs in psychology. And I think the slide that's there just highlights UCD as a program that has QQI and FET places. So it's really about finding out information. And the last thing I just want to highlight in terms of a question that might be common is, what will I be doing when I'm in psychology? And just my last two slides have really captured a really key message, which is psychology is a very broad degree. In the same way that Nuala has highlighted that there's lots of things that you can do with a degree in psychology, the main reason for that is because the degree itself is very broad. So these are the key areas that the Psychological Society of Ireland ensure are part of every accredited programme. And while there will be choice within those areas, you will have a grounding in these different areas. And then the next slide, just using our own degree here in UCD as an example, shows how the typical structure of an undergraduate program, whether 3 or 4 years, is that you start at a very general introductory level. If you can click on there, Shane, you start at a very introductory level with, intro to psychology, introduction to social psychology, research methods and statistics. And then as you progress into second year, we begin to support you to deepen your understanding. The modules become more specialized. They become more applied, so that in third year, you're doing advanced modules, you're taking options in the professional areas and learning about them. And all of the undergraduate programs that we talked about will have that combination of core modules that you must do and option modules that you can choose your interests. And the other thing I would highlight is, for all of these programs, there is a strong focus on research methods. There is a strong focus on statistics, but you shouldn't be put off by that. We in any of the programs, you will be supported to develop the skills needed. So that's the last of my input. So what I'm going to do now is to hand you over to our guest speaker who's come along today. And I'm delighted to have Rona here. Rona is a graduate of our program here in UCD. And we've asked Rona to talk a little bit about her experience of her pathway into psychology and what she's doing herself. So Rona, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hello, everybody. I kept some notes as going along there. There's a couple of things that popped up. I thought, oh, well, maybe comment on that. But the first thing is reflecting back on my time in secondary school. I wasn't very academic and I didn't do very well in secondary school, but I was very good at art and I focused on that, and I just didn't think that the academic route was for me. But I always was curious in people. So I had this want to go to college for like many years. So when I went down the route of the mature student route, it was for many reasons. Like, that curiosity stuck with me. I have many autistic family members. I have a huge interest in mental health issues. And the period before I returned to college, I actually was caring for my mum who had dementia. So like, I wanted to go back to college but I really didn't have the confidence. I didn't feel I could do it. I didn't think I had the academic ability. So that was one of the reasons that the route I took was through an access program. And then I did my degree in UCD, and then I am now in my master's in applied psychology in UCD.
You just unmute there on it.
Sorry, that must have muted me and I let somebody in. Sorry about that. So I did the Trinity Access program, which is great because it basically teaches you academic skills like how to write an essay, how to manage your time, how to study, basically. And it gave me the confidence to go on to do the degree. I actually, when you do the Trinity Access program, you get a plate. If you get enough points on your foundation course, you're allowed to go into, you get your choice of place. So I had a psychology degree place in Trinity, but I actually also did the outside exam for UCD, because I kind of wanted to gauge where I was at, and if I could get in. It was kind of like just I suppose a personal challenge, and I ended up having both places, and I chose UCD, which has been a great decision. It's a really, really lovely college. I suppose one thing I want to say before I forget, because it's kind of actually, because I made points about like different tips and points about the course, is that it's been a really, really enjoyable experience. It's a really interesting course. It has been challenging at times, but it's very rewarding. And I think ultimately how interesting, how enjoyable, how engaging, the level of support you get, that pulls you through. I do kind of wonder about people who are in degree courses that aren't as interesting, how they manage to get through the more challenging times. And the note I made was, Suzanne said, yes, you have to do statistics. And I don't know if any of you have heard about, sometimes somebody had passed a comment to me before I went into college saying, like, oh, you have to do statistics, and maybe people can have a bit of concern about that. I would say that genuinely, if I can do statistics, anybody can do statistics. It is taught in a manner that's bite-sized chunks. You learn as you go along. And even though at times I felt that everybody else was in the swimming pool and they were doing the breaststroke and I was doing the doggy paddle, I did get there. And I did quite well. So anybody can do it. So I wouldn't let that put you off doing the course. It's too good a course. It's too good an opportunity to be dissuaded by just avoiding the statistics. Sorry, I'm just aware of the time. I don't want to hog all your time. The other thing that I wrote is that one of the most important things for me as a mature student, it was actually mentioned to me when I did the Access course interview. It was said that the lady who interviewed me said that the number one reason that mature students either fail to complete their degree or end up having a delay in finishing their degree is to do with finance. It's not to do with motivation. It's not to do with ability. And it really stuck with me. And her advice was to get my finances in order before I started my degree. And that's what I did. So it's actually a really good aspect of doing an Access course, even if it's a part-time Access course, is to give yourself a chance to get your finances in order. You might be coming from you're working full-time and you have to save, or you might be coming from being a single parent or being a carer and you're kind of receiving a social welfare payment. I met quite a few people when I was a mature student who had not informed social welfare before they started their degree, and then were in distress basically, because you can't do that. You must have your back to education sorted before you start your degree. They don't allow that basically. So it's just an oversight and a misunderstanding, but it must be in place before you start your degree. The other thing is some of the scholarships that are available, they're only available before you start your degree. So I actually applied for the university scholarship, which is a relatively new scholarship. It's only maybe 3 or 4 years old. And when I would get into conversation in first year, like lots of mature students were like, that sounds amazing, that would be such great help, I wouldn't have to work part-time. But it's only open when the application is only open to those in the year before you start. You can't apply for it in first year. And there's a couple of scholarships that are like that. So yeah, I know there's a lot of kind of secondary school students that's obviously maybe not quite applicable for them, but for the mature students that are watching, it's really, really important, because the finance aspect doesn't seem to catch people up until maybe second or third year. First year seems to be fine, you seem to kind of get through okay, but then it comes to kind of bite you in second and third year. And then the last thing that I'd like to speak about is, I suppose, what have I learned, what have I gained from this course? And I suppose my end goal is to be a counselling psychologist, but I'm aware that like not everybody wants to go down that route, and there are loads of transferable skills that everybody learns. And some of the things that jumped to my mind when I think about my own experience is that I was actually quite at poor computer skills before I started. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. That just I'm much more tech savvy now, and much more confident and comfortable with it. The other thing is that critical thinking. That's probably the biggest one for me from the course. I think like the psychology degree, it's not so much like it changes what you think about, it changes how you think about things. So I'm much more logical and rational and unbiased in my views. I'm less ruled by emotion, I suppose. That it's that kind of objective analysis of an issue. That's huge. It's like it's the biggest aspect of the course. It's not just one big thing. It weaves its way into so many aspects of your daily living, never mind in a professional setting. The other thing that I've learned that are transferable skills are like writing and research skills. And as I said previously, I wasn't very academic in secondary school. I was actually really poor in English, and you can learn everything. It's like learning, like for initially when I started, it was like painting by numbers. You're learning to write an essay like painting by numbers, but then you notice that your structure and the way that you can construct an argument is improving, and then that ability to kind of write an essay and structure an argument, and your ability to you're learning how to research in an effective way. It affects your communication, because when you're having if you're giving a presentation, you're aware of what's most important to how to get your point across. Or if you're in a group doing a group assignment with people, that that you have to get your message across, that you're developing all these skills that may not be very obvious at the time, but you're subtly taking them on board. And yeah, I did on one of the slides, I noticed that it said group work and teamwork, and these are the skills that when you're taking part in group and teamwork in college, you're learning to be a better communicator, to develop your communication skills. And I did see on the slide that said what was it, conflict resolution. Well, you'd be glad to know that I've never had I haven't had an experience in college where I've had to use conflict resolution. It's a very welcoming, kind environment. Working with teams, doing presentations. Yeah, you build lots of skills. Maybe some of the other people on my course got to develop some of their conflict resolution skills a little bit better. And your listening skills is the biggest one as well, that you develop in college. Overall, just because you have to learn how to listen to absorb the information in the lectures, and then you will end up doing some classes that are scattered throughout, like counselling and clinical skills. You don't have to, but a lot of people choose to do those. But yeah, that's all the points that I'd like to make. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask. But thanks very much for listening to me.
So just a reminder, guys, if you want to put up your hand using the Zoom, we can unmute you then if you have any questions. Alternatively, a few of us can stick on and answer some questions inside the meeting chat there.
I did see in the chat somewhere that somebody had put a question about saying they were working full time and they're wondering if they could do it part time. Just from my own personal experience, even though your contact hours are mainly for the psychology course is about 16 contact hours a week, but the contact hours don't really, like, that's just when you're in college. Like, there's a lot of work that you have to put in around that. So I didn't meet anybody who worked full time. I've met people that work part time, but any more than part time work, I don't think is maybe realistic as regards to be able to get a good grade at the end, a good kind of end result, especially in third year.
Always some shy attendees when it comes to questions. That doesn't change even when you get on to, I know when I was teaching our clinical psychology trainees, so the doctoral students this year, every time I asked a question, there was silence for the first 5 minutes.
There are some questions in the chat though, Suzanne. I don't know if you can see them.
I can see some of them. I think some of them have slid by.
Yeah, some have been answered. I just see, is there any that haven't been?
One question that came through directly to me was about having level 8 and level 9 training in other areas, sort of very complementary to psychology, like, business or education or social sciences, and whether that would qualify someone to go on to a postgraduate program in psychology. Unfortunately, it's highly unlikely that even with level 8 and level 9 qualifications that you've done enough of the breadth of psychology. So, for example, the PSI criteria for accreditation require that you do basic and advanced modules in 5 of 6 key areas. So even if you've had, optional modules in psychology or modules that are very psychology relevant, you might not have done enough to have that basic and advanced training across all areas. And the other thing that's very often missing is that training in methodology. So again, another requirement of the PSI criteria is that there's clear training in a range of research methods. And that the typical expectation is that that will include experimental research methods. And again, that's something that you don't really get as part of a psychology program. So you may be incredibly skilled and really well trained in your chosen area, but an undergraduate degree or equivalent in psychology shows that you have the breadth of psychology knowledge that's considered to be the foundation for any of those professional areas that Nuala talked about. Peter asked about distance learning. Again, I know DCU has an accredited program in psychology, which is a distance learning program. Also, I would mention the Open University. There's a little known fact that the British Psychological Society and the Psychological Society of Ireland have a mutual agreement to recognise each other's programs. So if you have done a BPS accredited program in the UK, some of which are distance learning, it is recognised as being the equivalent of a PSI accredited programme here in Ireland. So we would often have students who have done their undergraduate programmes in the UK and, you know, come back to Ireland to do their postgraduate training. And also a lot of students go to the UK to do their postgraduate training because there's just so many more courses there. So yeah, I think if you were to look at the distance option, DCU is the only one formally named as distance ed. But again, increasingly different universities are offering different sort of hybrid options and opportunities. But there's no doubt that the majority of the programs are full-time and in person in terms of what's currently available in Ireland.
Just another question here from Adele says, if a student completes a joint honours BA with psychology, will they be as qualified as somebody who completes a degree in psychology/applied psychology?
My answer, and Nuala may have more experience of these programs, but as long as it has been accredited by PSI, because again, PSI have looked at the psychology component and have said, yes, there is everything that's needed here. What you'll notice is that the joint honours courses are the ones that are most likely to be the 4-year programs, because again, they're recognising that you need that that bit more time. But as long as it's accredited, whether it is joint honours or single honours, just be very careful that obviously different institutions have multiple programs. So we have our BSc in psychology, we have our BSc International, and we have our higher diploma. All 3 of those are accredited. And for most settings where there's one accredited programs, they all are. But you must make sure if you graduate from a program that's not accredited, it won't be recognised in the same way.
There's just a question from Kira there. I'm just gonna see, can you unmute there, Kira?
Hey
When I
guys,
ask you to.
can you hear me? I'm
Yep.
in leaving, sir, and I'm obviously hoping to do psychology, but I'm hoping to go to Galway, but the kind of courses there are either straight psychology, which is obviously high points. I think it's 545, and then obviously the other option is arts. So my kind of ideal situation that I'd be thinking is to go with the arts, and then hopefully everything going well to you know, do that kind of transfer after first year. So I was just wondering if you know, like, how competitive realistically is that? Because I know obviously there's small amounts of places and stuff like that.
So I won't answer. I won't answer to the competitive just yet. But what I'll say is, if you're looking for an arts degree and you're looking to get into the second year, to segue into psychology that way, I would just make sure that overall in your 3 years of arts, if perchance that you don't get into the second year, or that you might have an interest in something else, is to make sure that over those 3 years that you do at least 60 credits in psychology, because that's what a lot of these conversion courses are looking for when they're asking you to apply. I managed to do 55 credits at the course I was doing, only that I was lucky enough that I had some sociology research. So they can be quite lenient if you do a module that is research based. But definitely make sure you're doing 60 credits, and you can see these things in the course program. In terms of competition, the conversion courses can be that bit easier, I find, than definitely going straight into an undergraduate. But it would depend year to year. You'd also have to just write a statement letter about yourself, but that's typically what they're looking for, is your transcripts from your arts degree and just a statement about yourself. I'm not sure, does anyone else have anything else to add there in terms of competition or anything?
I think, Shane, your comment highlights that actually there's 2 types of conversion programs. So the programs that are 2-year higher diplomas typically don't have that 60 credit requirement. They can be for someone who's got any degree and no psychology, because you do the equivalent of the undergrad degree over 2 years. The 1-year conversion master's programs, like the one in Limerick and other places, they're the ones that require you to have the 60 credits. And then what they focus on are the areas that you would less likely to have achieved, like the experimental research design, the thesis and things like that. So I think what that highlights is it's really important to really research the programs that are there. But Clara, I think what your question also touched on is that idea of transferring within programs. So taking up a place on the arts program in Galway, and at the end of first year in Galway, applying to transfer program. And if Galway is anything compared to UCD, which I'm sure it is, that is a really, really, really tricky route to take, because they are the ones with the small numbers. And if you haven't, you might be up against someone who's coming from, you know, they started in Cork and they want to move back to Galway to finish their degree, and they've done a whole first year of psychology and they're just simply changing program. We rarely take in students who've done, you know, 1 or 2 psychology modules in first year into second year, because it's just so competitive. So I think Shane's point about, if you're going to take up a degree program in the hope that you might be able to transfer, be really comfortable with the degree program you're taking up, because the strongest option to you might be to actually finish out a strong degree and then look to those conversion programs.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, and again, I don't know much about Galway, but at Maynooth, you can apply to do through arts or through science and do psychological studies as part of your degree, and then go on to the conversion program. So it's kind of nearly been set up in that way that, so you're talking kind of nearly 200 points probably in the difference. And, you know, getting a range of subjects also at first year, some of which are very complementary to psychology. So, for example, you can study sociology or anthropology along with your psychological studies, and then progress on to the conversion if you felt you wanted to continue the psychology route. But even that combination of courses could lead to a very interesting career area that mightn't be as a psychologist, but working very much within very similar settings to what a psychologist would work in. So I do think, you know, some of the portals like Qualifax and Careers Portal are very useful in terms of looking at the combinations of things that you can do, what the content of courses are. So really worth looking at those before you make your decision in terms of what will I actually be doing when I'm on my degree. What will I be doing in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, and trying to you know, make your decisions based on that. But that there are other alternatives to the kind of the high point courses, and sometimes they're just not very visible, is what I'm saying. So really worth going to the open days or any online open events that the universities have, and asking those questions specifically to that university or to that college, so that you're getting the most up-to-date information as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
that was
and
really helpful. Thank you, guys.
No problem.
Cheers.
Any more questions there?
Sorry, just a question from Jane. It says, after the initial undergraduate honours degree, is it possible to go straight into a doctorate for clinical or counselling psychology? I might just comment on that, just because that's the route that I'm on. And I've spent a lot of time working out what is the best route to do. So basically, counselling psychology in Ireland, it's only in Trinity, and there's only 14 places at the moment, and it's unfunded. So most people go, even if they want to become a counselling, ultimately become a counsellor, a counselling psychologist, they go through the clinical psychology route, because it's 60% of your fees are paid, and you get paid for your work experience as you progress through your 3-year doctorate. When I went to a Zoom information evening last semester, and I was on the other side, I was listening to other people, and the lady there, or the facilitator, basically said that they do it on a grading system. So it's very unusual not to have a master's, basically what he said. So like an odd exception will happen that somebody has like a lot of work experience, they have their degree, or maybe, you know, from a long time ago, it's fine, but they've built up a lot of work experience, but they're the exception to the rule. Generally, it's you do need the master's, hence why I am currently doing a master's in applied psychology. So yeah, it is a long route, but when you do it, you can see it all makes sense. Like the degree, you need the degree because it's your foundation. It's like the building blocks. Everything else makes sense. You have to understand. You have to get the learning so you can even read a journal to be able to. It's like learning a language and being able to interpret a journal. And then the next stage, the master's, is where you're going a little bit closer to the areas that you're more interested in, and then the doctorate is you're specializing. So yeah, sorry to break bad news to you, but I think you do.
I think there has been a development most recently, thanks in no small part to work by PSI, to try and promote funding for other doctoral training programs. And I know counselling psychology will receive funding in similar to the system that clinical has. But I think, Rona, what you've picked up on is it's not about whether you're eligible to apply, it's whether you're going to be able to compete for a place. And it's that competition that's really important, because you want to think about the other people that you're applying with, and what sort of a profile that they have. So it is very, very rare that you will have that direct route. I think the one exception would be with that new BEd education and psychology program in Mary Immaculate College. You're going to be much more able to apply directly to an educational psychology doctoral program, because you have that brilliant combination of education training and psychology training. But other than that, I think it's hard to be competitive. It's really hard to be competitive without some postgraduate. But the one thing I would say is the universities and other institutions have developed really nice 1-year advanced skills training programs that are specifically for that. You've got your undergraduate, you want to apply to do a doctoral level postgraduate, and you want a program that will enhance your skills but not take 2 to 3 years. So you have programs like the Masters in Applied Psychology in Trinity, the MPsych Science here, programs in Limerick and in Cork as well. There's many of them, and they're 1-year sort of advanced skills focused postgraduate programs, level 9 master's programs that will be that pathway into further doctoral level training. But if you are applying for a master's program that's at master's level, occupational psychology, many of the programs, there's a good mix of doctoral and level 8 and level 9 and level 10. If the training program you're applying for is a level 9, you won't need to have another level 9 degree to apply for it. That's where the experience, the interest, and all of those things come to play, which Nuala talked about when she was talking about those career options.
And you can do, if Jane is interested in counselling psychology, you can do like a master's in DCU or a 4-year part-time master's level 9. And you're good to go then after that. You don't have to do the doctorate.
Lots of great questions.
Does anyone else have any questions or feel like their questions haven't been answered earlier on? Now, you still have the options as well, if your questions aren't answered today, that you can email sppc@psychologistsociety.ie, or you can email myself at policy@psychologistsociety.ie. If there aren't any more questions, there's a few helpful resources there. We'll probably send these out when we're sending out the recording of the webinar, just on accredited courses and just some context in PSI if you ever have any questions, and of course joining PSI. But yeah, from there, there's one more question there, we might take it, we have to wrap it up. Question there, are there any arts courses accredited?
So I think if the question is, so psychology is studied in the context of an arts degree in a number of places, and the model is typically that in your first year you do psychology and some other subjects, but for I think all of the accredited programs, once you get into second year and beyond, it's pure psychology. But the general arts degrees, I think in Galway they have psychological studies, and I think in Maynooth as well, Nuala, they have psychological studies, and they would be considered what's sometimes called a minor. So they're not a major subject, they're a small part of your degree, and typically they would not be accredited. But again, they might be relevant to the conversion pathway that Shane talked about. But the main thing is, and Shane has the link there, is that link to accredited courses. There is a list of all the currently accredited undergraduate programs in the Republic that have received that recognition from PSI. And I did see there was a question earlier about courses that aren't accredited. It sometimes can be as simple as a young course hasn't yet established itself enough to apply for accreditation. It could be the organisation doesn't feel like they want accreditation, but there is no doubt that the accreditation is a stamp of a consistent standard of quality that is recognised as being required for a degree in psychology.
Perfect, folks. Right, thanks very much for everyone's time, especially to our speakers. And Ronan, thanks very much for giving your story and side of things. Again, if there's any questions, you can just email sppc@psychologistsci.ie, or you can email myself, policy@psychologistsci.ie. So with that, thanks very much, folks. And we'll end it there.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.